There is no way of us knowing about the implications of genetic change done today and how those will turn out in the future, but the temptation to improve ourselves is ever present and always enormous. We do it spiritually, physically, by improving our character and working out to stay fit. And some people do it in an extreme way by plastic surgery. Science fiction may envision a future of utopia or dystopia. The utopia would be that we can cure all sorts of diseases and extend our lives. But ultimately, as the followers of transhumanism believe, we will eventually merge with technology. From humans en route to transhumanism, and then to a final stage of posthumanism, where the current biological definition of a human being will be forever changed, and by that time we will have different species of humans. The human condition is what it is, and perhaps longer lives will not make it better, nor will having integrated computers in our brain make us ultimately happy and blissful. There is a very linear straightforwardness in the hope of transhumanists and how they perceive what the research in genetics and technology will bring forth. The term transhumanism is what describes this process where the human is enhancing or upgrading itself and departing from the classical biological human. There are many viewpoints on where the border goes from human and transhuman, or I mean from human to transhuman. Some say it is far up the line when we really mix with technology, as in having implants and body extensions, wireless communications in our brains, and that sort of things. While others say it's much closer than that, and they put it as soon as we do pre-birth genetic modifications. One definite definition is when a human being as we know it today cannot procreate with a eventual transhuman or post-human. That's the definite line. So when those two are not compatible to produce in a natural way a healthy child, then we have a division between humans and a new human species. I want to share a light on the original concept and what the man who coined the term transhumanism thought. It was Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother, and we can read the optimistic versions that empowered men like Julian Huxley in a rather cold way, combined with the rationality of those times, the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s. And they all openly speak about, a centralized, mandatory, and, what we might consider today to be a directly oppressive methods of improving the human population. That's eugenics. So transhumanism and eugenics are initially brothers and sisters. It's like the same thing, the two sides of a coin. Its value is the same, but it has two faces. Today, the term transhumanism isn't associated with those centralized and authoritarian methods, but what we see is that ideas change so much in less than 100 years. So even if we have a good flow of democratic, open society kind of technological research and idea of transhumanism, that might change. And also different areas in the world will always adapt technology in their own way. I mean, if that technology was possible today to really do some custom design to a baby or upload or download a mind, just imagine how differently it will look in Europe, in North Korea, in the Middle East, and in America, Latin America, Africa. Not that all those would have maybe a government program, but there will be open markets, black markets, and as with technology, it always gets cheaper and easier and more accessible, like biology today, where biohackers are the sort of the new thing for the century. Therefore, it is always important to be aware that a society can fall within a decline in the sense of human rights and human dignity, and the implications of technology and, in this case, biogenetical enhancements, that might just, end up really bad, because technology is permanent. It takes lots of, it would take a huge catastrophe to sort of eliminate our technological standard, while ideas, you just have to look back 50, 100, 150 years. It's very different. And in the Western world, we have a sort of, what we might call a linear progressive way to it. And I mean progressive in a more evolutionary sense, not in the political term progressive, while other regions in the world have very dynamic, the progress is very dynamic, so it can be like a good society, and within 20 years it's all in rumbles, as we see today also happening in the Middle East and North Africa and other regions. So the present society and its ideas and values will always have a direct effect on the technology available, and that's very much harder to control compared to the actual technology. I mean, as you see, we can have nuclear weapons and not firing them, but if things get heated up by very foolish reasons, ideas change, society goes through some sort of dynamic phase. Technology is a victim of that. We always are the ones who pull the trigger and make the bad choice. From the most important point of John Stuart Mill, the freedom of speech, we can extrapolate an equal important right that should never ever be threatened in a functional society. That is the right to one's biological and genetic body. So this is the adaptation of those libertarian values of freedom of speech, individual rights, things that have become common, and we have conventions and dots in documents people can point to and say, look, this is human rights. So we will need to expand that to guarantee the integrity of a human being who does not want to be voluntarily or forced to do any sort of genetic tampering. And this also goes to the indirect effect of genetically modified food and such. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a clinic that does something to a human body or so, but it can also be the surroundings. In that case, we can imagine a world where you have countries that are very liberal with genetic supermarkets, as Robert Nozick said, while other countries may have mandatory genetic modifications in humans or in a pre-birth scenario, while other countries maybe have banned it altogether. And then you have eventually a commercial travel to those countries that have a liberal supermarket, genetic supermarkets. So politicians and governments will be eventually forced into be the biggest major player in this genetic chaos or possibility, whatever you want to look at it. And that is why there is a need for a fundamental outline of human rights regarding this in the direct sense and also in the indirect sense, as I said earlier. Governments might be using the argument that if we modify our offsprings, we might reduce health issues, health costs, and therefore we should have a mandatory implementation of genetic pre-birth modification. The question is still, will these genetical improvements improve our lives the way optimists of this imagine? Because if we look at our society today, if you live in the Western world, you have every possibility to be super fresh and healthy and fit and all that, and happy in your head and heart and stomach. But compare that, just 150, 200 years, those people, if they knew like, oh, will that be possible in the next 200 years? Wow, that's such an improvement. The same thing we might consider today of people who might live longer lives or not have some diseases we have today, but will it make the life quality better? For example, in Sweden, the peasants, the normal people used to eat porridge 200 years ago or 150 years ago in some cases. Today you can eat anything in every store. So has that improved the happiness, the compassion, the value system, or has the sort of freedom and constant availability of all this sort of made it all into a postmodern confused mess of both values, minds, hearts, and stomachs? I would say it has. I would say that it doesn't matter if you live 800 years or 80 years or 8 years. If you don't know how to live a good life, and when I say good, I mean like you feel really comfortable and confident, and you have love, work, and things to be proud of, things to look forward to, and be in a good manners with other people, then you won't do it even if you lived 8 million years. So I think that point of people to reach in that spiritual maturity or intellectual maturity, whichever you prefer, I think they're both the same, because everything goes hand in hand. Then we can start and say like, hey, this is a good society. But as we have seen, it doesn't matter if you have if you had free vitamin pills and orange juice, really freshly squeezed orange juice every day for people, if they don't have the content, the happiness, it's really hard to see that like just in prolonging their lives and making them free of diseases will cause something better. It will be an improvement, but hey, we have improved our lives for over the last 200 years, and we just got new diseases and new ways of complaining and whining and all that. So yeah, but then again we have this dystopian view like Aldous Huxley. He talks about in his book Brave New World about moksha, the soma, the thing people take to be content and happy. So maybe that's the only way to really drug people. And the one thing both of these Huxleys have in common is that one of the brothers was hey, that sounds great. The other brother was more like, I see no other way. It might probably be like a consent dystopia. Like people are, they give consent. They approve of the sort of centralized system they live in, as long as they get their little happy pills or and all that. So both of them saw the same thing for the future, but in different ways. Powerful means of biological and technological control require an unified effort on a global scale to reduce the risks, misuses of the future technologies involving biotech especially. One failure could be exponentially more devastating than anything ever possible in the past. For example, a nuclear blast, destroys an area for a long time, but genetic tampering and all that can have an everlasting effect. So that's why I think it's important to for this topic to be brought about more, because we will have totalitarianism, open markets, and all that involving genetical modifications around the world, because the world doesn't work like a unified body. It's very different on each continent, in each system. So, but at least if we have some dots added to the human rights definitions, that people who eventually fall victims of mandatory genetical enhancements or something like that, they can always point to something. And also for people who live in a free society, can also point to that and keep that fresh, and also inspire people who are not in the same fortunate circumstances as them. Thank you for listening. Take care and all the best.